Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Paula Fontana, Interim President for the National Black MBA Association. Thank you so much for joining us for Protecting Your Mental Well-Being in Corporate America. So, if you are unfamiliar with us, the mission of the National Black MBA Association is to lead in the creation of educational, wealth building, and growth opportunities for Blacks throughout all stages of their careers as students, professionals, and entrepreneurs. And we accomplish this mission in partnership with organizations that take the time to engage with our membership. Organizations such as our sponsor today, Mondelez International. Now more than ever, the notion of mental well-being is top of mind, dealing with everything from macro to microaggressions, conscious, unconscious bias, not to mention the past over 2 years of madness that we have had to deal with this pandemic. But no worries, help is here. Thankfully, today, our sponsor, Mondelez International, will talk to us about how we can protect our mental well being during these crazy times. Moderating the panel today and taking it away is Jamie Martin. Jamie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Paula, for that great intro. And thank you for all who have joined the session today. We're so excited to be here. We are Mondelez International. We are a $28 billion snacking powerhouse organization, international, with brands that you know and love like Oreos, Sour Patch Kids, Cadbury Milk, etc. And we are so excited to be here to share with you some of our learnings on this specific topic. We know the last 2 years has been very challenging with the murder of George Floyd, a pandemic, remote work, or for some, still having to go into work as frontline workers, and then the big return to work for those who are remote. Revisiting the pressures of office politics, micro inequities, and pressures to code switch or not, in fact, bring your whole self to in the office environment. So this has been a dramatic impact on our overall well-being. Anxiety has increased dramatically amongst Black and African Americans in the US since George Floyd, and 16% of Black or African American people reported having a mental illness. 22.4% reported having a serious mental illness. So we thought it would be highly relevant to create a panel of leaders to discuss ways in which they maintain their well-being while working in corporate America. So now I will introduce the panel. So first we have Kevin Singletary. He is the Senior Director, Supply Chain Excellence. Brianna Cooper, Director, Shopper Insights. Lauren Flanagan, Senior Manager, Direct to Consumer. And Michael is going to kill me because I may mispronounce his last name. Michael Ajunwan, Senior Manager of Finance. But thank you all for joining us today. And with that, we're going to get started because we know we have 30 minutes for this session and we really want to hear from all of our esteemed panelists. So I'd like to kind of start out with, obviously, the last couple of years, as I said, have been extremely tough on everyone. But I really wanted to kind of kick off by talking about the return, right? We are now in a spot where a lot of companies are not just trying out the return to hybrid work, they are fully fledged and asking people to come back in fully. So I wanted to hear a bit from Lauren Flanagan on that return to work, how it impacted her, what was her reaction to know that she had to go back, how it impacted her, and then how was her first few days kind of back in the office. Lauren?
Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for that question, Jamie. I think it's a great question. For me, my return to the office was not a return, actually. And during the pandemic, I was spending some time in Atlanta, which is where I'm born and raised. Prior to that, I had been living in Edgewater, New Jersey, which is just right outside New York City. Our headquarters, especially for marketing, is based in East Hanover, New Jersey. So I'd lived in that area for about 5 years, and the pandemic hit. I, like a lot of people, like a lot of my peers, decided to spend what I thought would be a few weeks at home with family where there'd be more space, a little bit more comfortable. then I, eventually realized that few weeks was going to be more than a few weeks. And it kind of put into perspective for me what was important for me in that moment. And I realized that I really had missed Atlanta and just the culture and being closer to family. And at that point, I was able to work with my manager and say, like I still really value being at Mondelez. I think I've had a great career here that I'd like to see continue to grow. And I am really enjoying my time in Atlanta, and I would love to see if there's a way to make both of those things possible. And so I did not return. I actually transitioned into the role that I am in now, which is a fully remote position. So it's on our digital commerce team, which all roles on our digital commerce team are remote. So you have the flexibility to work from anywhere. And there's a couple of other roles like that throughout the organization. So even though we did have some return to office conversations, I was able to enjoy the flexibility of Mondelez and be able to continue to live where I prefer, at least for the next couple of years. So yeah, I loved that ability to just continue to thrive where I already was. And it was something that brought me a lot of joy, and I think makes me more productive in my day job because of that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lauren. Talk to us a little bit about your experience with, making the decision to have that conversation with the organization, and, how you felt, any pressures, and, how did that all go for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think so. During the pandemic, I really felt like it was clear we could all do our jobs from anywhere. That wasn't really something that was in question. I still felt really connected to my team. Our team was still doing really great work. And so I knew that it was possible. And I think I also just wanted to make a holistic decision. And for me, again, it was being closer to family. I had the opportunity to buy a home. I met my boyfriend here. So there were some great personal reasons to want to be in Atlanta, but I also still, of course, value building my professional career. And I wanted to find a way for those two things to work. So I brought up the conversation with my manager and just was really open and honest about where I was, why I wanted to stay here, why I thought, it was something that could still work out, that I was still being productive and still doing really good work. And kind of like how I saw that working, whether that was staying in the role that I was in at the time or looking across the organization for roles that were built out as remote, and just working with my manager hand in hand. I had a lot of really great support. My manager actually came to me with options. We were actually meeting weekly at the time once I made the decision to stay in Atlanta. And he came to me with options each week on roles that were open and available and could be done remotely. So it was really a great partnership of, here are the skills that I want to develop. I want to be able to do that remotely. How can I do that in the next couple of years? And it was really awesome that I felt that support of him coming to me and working with me hand in hand to find a role that would meet all of the needs I was looking for at the time.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing, Lauren, because many of us moved, changed different aspects of our lives during the last couple of years where many worked remote. And really, Lauren kind of taking the kind of having the courage to have that conversation, to ask what she wanted in the situation, and being able to kind of find a balance and a compromise with the organization. Thank you so much for sharing, Lauren. Now let's talk a little bit about what also has happened for many of us over the last couple of years. An individual who joined a company during COVID, I still don't know how people did this, and is continuing to work remotely. And Michael, would love to hear about your experience and the challenges that may have happened or concerns that you've had kind of being a Black or African American individual joining an organization during COVID and remote.
Thank you, Jamie, for that question. So yes, I joined about a year ago, and of course, in the middle of COVID, everybody has been working remotely. So everybody is different, but for me, I get a lot of my energy or fulfillment from how I perform at work. So it was really important to me to perform well at work or to show up early. And then joining the company remotely, you see a new set of challenges, which is, how do you interact with people and how do you really connect and learn about the company. So for me, one of the things I did was to be more patient than you normally do when you're joining a company like during the normal course of events. And then working with my manager to set up some clear things that will help me get up to speed faster. So that is very important. You have to be more intentional in the way you onboard if you're joining in this environment. And you have to come with terms that this is just the new way of working. So whatever tools you need to be able to keep your energy high, to learn faster, to onboard faster, to get up to speed faster, you have to, take advantage of those and, set your boundaries. Same thing you would do in any other organization. You set those boundaries and, and in some cases, maybe even work a little harder because you're remote. And some of the learning that you pick up if you're in the office, you pick it up at the coffee station or somebody sitting next to you at your desk. You don't pick those up. So you have to be more intentional and maybe work a little bit harder to get that information from necessary sources. And one last thing I'll talk about is sometimes when you go into the office, you see people, affinity groups that you want to join, or people reach out to you because, oh, you're new, they come to talk to you. You don't have that opportunity when you're remote. So you have to be more intentional in reaching out to support groups that you may have questions, whether it's peers or even people ahead of you in the organization. So all those things help me overcome some of those challenges by joining in the middle of the pandemic.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. We'd love to hear a little bit about kind of thinking through your career aspirations. How do you make sure that you're building the right network and getting the right sponsorship as you are kind of joining and remaining remote? How do you think about those things?
The right network. So really, you have to ask. So everybody's familiar. Well, I'll say most people are familiar with like a first 90-day plan. And really, I'll say the first 6 months is really about learning about your role, the organization, and where you can add value. But towards the end of that 6 months, you start thinking about, okay, how long am I going to be in this role? Where do I project to? What's my next opportunity? And you have to ask your manager, number one, to connect you with the right people. And then most companies these days, they have a DEI group or an ESG group, ARG group. Connect with them because you need mentors. If you need a mentor, you can ask your manager, or depending on the level, or your manager's manager, like, listen, I need a mentor, whether it's at a senior director level or VP level, preferably maybe not in your function, that you could share your, goals, your aspirations to, and they can help guide you. But it's important to ask. You own your career and your development. So if you don't ask, and if your manager doesn't offer one to you, there's an impasse there. But you have to be intentional. You ask for a mentor. You ask for where are these groups that I can connect with, whether it's I joke with one of my managers, there's a women in leadership group, but it's not just for women. So, you can join and get information there and get sponsors there and get tips on how to advance within the company. But it's about asking, being intentional, and, carving out that time within your busy schedule to say, my development is important, and I'm going to seek out the right people to talk about how do I work on this? Where do I go next? And what stretch opportunities are there to introduce me to other parts of the business, which could be a springboard to your next role or your promotion.
Michael, thank you so much for sharing that, because I think the key word there is intentional, right? Intentionality has taken on a whole new meaning as part of kind of being remote, and ensuring that you're very intentional about conversations, coffee chats, connecting, and making sure that you're building that network and building sponsorship in the organization. Thank you for sharing.
Your pleasure.
So I'd love to kind of switch over to Brianna. We call her Bree, to talk a little bit about also joining during COVID, but having kind of this challenge of managing a large team remotely that you've never met. Talk to us a little bit about that experience, Bree.
Yeah, so I empathize a lot with what Michael said. Experienced a lot of those joys and challenges, if you will, of joining a company remotely. And I'd say a lot of those things that he talked through also applies to managing a team really of any size. And for me, trust is really important. It's an important ingredient of how I think about my leadership style and what it takes to be an effective leader. And a lot of that trust can be developed through things that happen virtually, right? It's through your functional expertise and demonstrating to your team that you've got the skill set and the experience to be able to lead the team effectively. It can be, showing them that you're their advocates and their biggest champions to help them with their own professional goals. But there's also a lot of kind of personal elements that come into play with that, right? In terms of building relationships. And I think that I highly underappreciated, did not fully kind of understand the challenges that comes with building a relationship with people that you've never met in person, right? Because a lot of that happens outside of formal meetings. As Michael said, it's at the water cooler. It is popping by their desk for a 15-minute chat. It's the impromptu lunches. It's the few minutes before the meeting and the 10 minutes after the meeting where you're just hanging out in the meeting room, right? And you don't have those moments to build those personal connections. And so I quickly realized that I had to find virtual ways to sort of replicate those experiences. It was being very purposeful about putting time on my team's calendar where it's like, this is not business conversation. We're just going to talk about life and what's happening and let's catch up, right? It's putting an hour for our business connects, knowing full well that it'll only take 30 to 40 minutes, but that gives us a buffer to just talk about the weekend. What did you do? Get to know them personally. So I had to start to build in some of those things to try to, again, replicate those experiences. And now that the restrictions have been lifted and we're allowed to travel a little bit more, I fully maximize the time that we have in person to really make sure that we're doing the business stuff, but we're also connecting and having fun and creating those opportunities for us to build that rapport and build those connections. I think the other thing too that was very apparent to me is I learned very earlier in my career through having really amazing managers that sometimes your manager has to save you from yourself when you're sick and trying to power through and probably shouldn't, or when you're burning the midnight oil every night and you need them to kind of help you to step in and figure out how to prioritize. So it's something that I also applied to my leadership. And again, that's another thing where it's like you rely on a lot of nonverbal cues to do that, right? Like it can be toned to some degree. And so that can come through virtually. But it's a lot of in their body language, right? Where I was like, okay, you look off. Let's talk about it. Let's go into a huddle room. And I can help them navigate through that. But that showed them that I cared, that it wasn't just about the points that they put in on the board from a business perspective, but that I cared about them as a total person, which also contributes to that trust. And so, I'd be lying if I said that I fully mastered it at a year and a half, but it's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of creativity and how I think about I build connections and also personalizing it as needed based on the person, because not the way that you build a connection with every person is not going to be a peanut butter spread.
Thank you so much, Bree, because I think what's critically important in what you're saying around making time with your team and also how that impacts your overall well-being. And at times as a leader or manager, people have had to step in and say, hey, Bree, you're sick, right? And, so I'm sure that you are stepping in those same ways. Talk to me a little bit about your kind of experience as joining as a manager, a Black or African American woman, and wanting to make sure that you set yourself up properly in the organization and that you're making the right connections and that you're building and leading the team properly. Was there anything you thought about in particular, being who you are?
Yeah, I think, again, sort of building on some of Michael's comments, it was thinking differently about how I built my network, right? It wasn't just through the key stakeholders or folks that I have to interact on a day-to-day basis, but it was finding those other work streams, finding those other opportunities for me to be able to connect with other leaders in ways that wouldn't naturally happen through my day-to-day work, as another sort of tool in the toolbox, if you will, to be able to expand my network. I think the other thing that's really important for me in general as a Black woman, and especially a Black woman who has had the privilege of stepping into a leadership role, as cliche as it sounds, is to truly embrace this idea of being my authentic self. Now, what that looks like will mean different things to different people, right? And so I'm not ignoring that code switching happens and is a real thing, but I try to really govern myself as much as I can to avoid doing that, as much as I can. And so really just owning my voice, being my authentic self, not being shy about my opinions, even very early on in the organization as I was still learning, is a principle that is sort of in my DNA of how I choose to show up in an organization. And it's an important way of how I continue to just sort of set my equity and kind of establish how I choose to exist.
Great. Thank you so much, Bree. And I love this is a really, really great segue to a question for Kevin Singletary, the one individual on this panel who has worked in our field organization in manufacturing. formerly being a plant manager of one of our plant in Atlanta. Thank you for joining, Kevin. We chatted a little bit about and prep for this around, all the external impacts that have been occurring. Like if we think about, George Floyd being the original, the pandemic, the January 6th hearings we kind of chatted about, right? Like all of
Mhm.
these elements that are impacting us externally, where we're then having to walk into the organization, right, and do our jobs. Talk to me a little bit about, your experience with that and how you, handle, make sure that you're protecting your well-being on a daily basis with these external factors.
Okay, thank you for the question. I think it was key not just to protect my own, but also the 450 folks that were on site in Atlanta, and as well as my leadership team. So, what was really good about, if there's a good thing about the George Floyd, was that our leadership, in being part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion, was openly talking about it and saying that this is not okay. And so I actually had my leader was calling me with my HR leader and asking, how am I feeling? How the folks in the plant feeling? Is there anything they could do? And in some cases, I found myself representing the site to them. We had some folks that were protesting down in Atlanta, downtown, but I was able to have that conversation, and that was somewhat therapeutic. The other piece of that, though, was to have these conversations with my leadership team to talk about how we would engage people on the floor, to openly go have a proactive town hall and talk about, let's acknowledge that some of us are tired of being tired, some of us are frustrated, and then some of us are like one step from just blowing up, right? And so we talked about the services that are available. Feel free to come have these conversations with us. So that allowed us to kind of have this connection and talk to the plant. But I really appreciated the fact that my leadership was calling and asking me. Now let's flip to a different situation with the January 6th. And I can think about one particular leader that tended to be, some folks would say passionate, some folks would say maybe too aggressive, um, and tended to make political statements, social economic statements. And instead of like battling face to face, what I decided to do was ask open-ended questions like, okay, if January the 6th is okay, would it have been okay if your candidate had won and this happened? Would it have been okay if would have been Black Lives Matter running through the Capitol? Would it have been okay? And so that allowed he and I to have these conversations. And at times, he would be pretty assertive. And I even used to coach him around, hey, sometimes I think your team's afraid of you. Um, and then I can remember one particular time when he expressed a point of view, and I said, that's not all right. Mondelez has guidelines for how we work in our organization. And I want you to understand something. If you go over that guideline, if you violate it, I will go over your head and turn you in. Secondly, I want you to understand is that I'm not intimidated by you at all. Okay. So we can have these conversations, but you will not cross the line. And so he later came back and apologized. And what I think that allowed between me and this particular leader, who's no longer with the organization, was that we were able to engage at a business level. And that's what we have to do when we go to work. We have to be successful, but we also have to decide what we're going to put up with and what we're not going to put up with. So, two examples, external situations definitely impact our mental health and the way that we deal with things. And so we need to be prepared to do that.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And thank you for your courage as a leader in that organization and that plant to kind of step up and really make sure that that individual knew that that was not, aligned with Mondelez's values. So thank you for your leadership and courage there, because it takes all of us and it takes leaders to kind of step up and advocate as well. So
Definitely.
now that we have a few minutes left, I really like to hear from folks in the comments if you have questions or if you want to share, how do you protect your mental health and well-being on a daily basis? And while we do that, I'd love to hear, we'll go around quickly, starting with Lauren, then Bree, then Kevin, then Michael. Share, what way do you like leave work? What are some ways that you um, do? What are things you do to help protect your well-being or to recharge after kind of a long day of being on at work? What do you do to recharge yourself for the next day? Lauren?
I love that question. And I think, especially if you're a remote worker, I think it's really important to establish routines that allow you to have time to do self care and really just intentionally think about your mental health. Otherwise, you'll be sitting at the computer all day. So I think it is really important to just be mindful about how much time you're spending on things or how much time you've been sitting or sitting at your desk. So for me, I like to do things during the day, and then I also like to find ways to give myself hard stops. So one thing is like I have like a bouncy ball that I'll sit on throughout the day just to like remind myself to move, or I have a standing desk that also kind of like plays that role. But I also really think it's helpful to have a reason to have a hard stop. Like I'm meeting this friend at this time to go get dinner, or I'm going to this workout class by 7 o'clock. So I think kind of like putting those things as planned in my day is something that really helps me. Or now that it's nice, crisp weather here in Atlanta, one of my favorite things to do is I'll take a walk every day after work when I'm done with like my last call. I think it's just like being mindful of having those moments to step away and continue to like keep things in perspective as well. Like I think when you're ambitious and you want to do a great job, it's important to just keep in perspective that you're a whole human with a holistic life outside of work as well, and to give energy to those other spaces of your life as well.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Bree?
Yeah, so I am a perfectionist, always have been, and my parents can attest to that. And that has transitioned into my adult life, right? And so one of the words that has become a consistent part of my vocabulary, and if I was to pull anyone from my team on here and ask them what word do I use often, they would undoubtedly say this, it's grace. And it's important for me to make sure that I am practicing extending grace to my team, which I'm obvious, to be honest, I'm a lot better at that, but to also give it to myself, to be kind to myself, to not beat myself up when I maybe didn't say the thing I should have said in a meeting, or if I didn't have the immediate response, or whatever the thing may be, just to be kind to myself in those moments, knowing that I'm not going to be, not going to have it all the time and be on my A game, 24/7. So just to really practice that element of grace, again, to others, but also to myself, which at least for me tends to be more challenging. And then, to Lauren's piece, the other thing is around just moving during the day. And I actually stole this from somebody on my team who tries to make sure that they take a 30-minute walk every day. And usually there's at least one meeting that I can be present on, but be on a call. Like I don't need to be in front of my computer. And so I'll ask like, hey, do you mind if I take a walk? And I know who I can and can't do that with, right? There's certain meetings where that's not appropriate, but that's something that I try to do is like, if there's a meeting where I can just be present on the call, but like taking a walk around the neighborhood to do that, to keep myself moving throughout the day.
Great. Thank you so much, Bree. Love it. Kevin?
I'd like to check what Bree and Lauren said. Those are great examples. One thing I'll also say, though, is as you're managing your career, I always tell folks that are coming into any organization, make sure you understand the unwritten rules. Ask your bosses, what are the unwritten rules that I don't know so I don't stump my toe? So that sets you up for success. Do you only wear gray suits? Do you not wear earth tones? Do you have to be a part of a board to get promoted to the next step? Do you supposed to play golf? So knowing those things sets you up for success. But then outside of the company, it's balance with the family. It's having my own executive team that I can bounce things off of. Like, what did y'all do with George Floyd? And I'm on the DE&I team. What are y'all doing in your company? Or if it's a former CEO, what do you think about this? So I also talk to professionals outside of work that are in related fields, and sometimes that are not in related fields, that just help you kind of balance what I'm doing. And one last thing, protect your schedule. There are times when you need to say, this is important, whether it's my child, whether it's my grandparent, protect that time, put it on your schedule, and you're not to be bothered at that time. You can get back to work after that time is over with, because if you violate those times, after a while, it's going to overwhelm you. So I think those are some very key points.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. So we're at a few seconds left. One word, Michael. What do you do?
Oh, wow. Really quick, create a folder in your email of all the compliments you've received. And whenever you feel like, oh, I'm stressed or this is just overwhelming, just go open that folder, see all the great compliments you've gotten the past year, and it'll pep you up. So I just recently started doing that. So hey,
Love it,
you're
Michael.
good at this, and don't be a prisoner of the moment.
Thank you so much, panel. I'm going to hand it over to Paula to wrap us up.
Yes, this was wonderful. I love that idea of just keeping track of all of the compliments and the positive things that have occurred to not allow the negativity to be the outstanding voice and noise. So, this has been an incredible and insightful session. Thank you again, Mondelez, for the session as well as for your partnership. And thank you all for joining us. We would love to hear from you. So we encourage all of you to complete the link that you will see in the chat to give us your feedback. The first 25 people to do so will be entered in a chance to win an Amazon gift card. So do not delay. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you soon.